Cool. So, hi to everybody. Like, whether I can see you or not, it's lovely to know that you're there. Feel your presence. It's kind of like God. Can't see God, but you can feel God's presence. There you go. Shabbat shalom, Rabbi. Oh, hello. Hi. Hi, Liara. So, I'm here because I get to teach monthly, and I'm excited to do so. And because it is Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month. Jennifer, I think, you're the one who told me I should teach about this, or I told you I was going to teach about this? You told me, yeah. So I was like, I totally should teach about that this month. So I'm very excited to do so. And Judaism kind of historically, there's a little bit of background, whether you're familiar with this or not, especially if you're not, Judaism is not the most friendly towards the disabled. And that's just true. Like historically, in terms of halakha, Jewish text, Jewish legal tradition is just not friendly towards the disabled. And I think it's really important to kind of dig a little deeper than that, than just accepting it, and to see what are some other things, kind of counter texts and values that our tradition holds that are true, but never are really delved into that deeply. Because it'd be easier to say like, oh, well, text says that someone who's, deaf or mute, because those are the terms, are you deaf, mute, or dumb, as the old term is, which is, again, old term, not my term, not your term, but was a term people would use back in the olden times. Then they're just, they don't get to do anything Jewishly. And that would be unacceptable by many of us, and saying like, okay, well, that's how people used to think about it, but now we think differently. And I think it's important to delve really deep into our tradition and our text to say, yeah, okay, I can see how some people got there and they think that, but what are some other just as old Jewish texts that actually say differently? There's more nuance to ancient and medieval Jewish writings and tradition and texts than, oh, you're not allowed to do anything if you're not completely neurotypical and able. So let's dive in. And I'm gonna share my screen down here. Share. And here. And share. Boom. We'll be all over here. So here we have, and again, I can only see a few of you down here. So if you need to interrupt to ask a question, maybe do so when I'm done presenting a slide, but please feel free to do so. So here we have B'tzelem Elohim in the image of God, which is a really great text to start. And so I told you I was going to take you back to like the basics of our tradition and what it says, because so much of our ancient tradition and texts say, if you're not completely able and typical, then you can't do anything. Ugh. What do we have that's also very, very, very old that says the opposite? Well, luckily, thank God, we have lots. So let's start with that very, very first thing. Very first text is where we got the name of this class from. And if you want to go back to an original text, you can talk about Genesis as being a very good original text. It's the original text, the very first book of the Torah, and God created humanity in the divine image, B'tzelem Elohim. In the image of God, they were created. This first human, it's a they, because the first human is kind of both male and female, which is the whole gender thing, which I talked about in a whole other class. So humanity is created in the divine image. Okay, nice statement. What does that actually mean? Well, luckily, some of our best and favorites, and my favorite, I'm sure some of your favorite too, medieval rabbis do to talk about this. They say like, okay, what does it mean to be created in the divine image? Rashi says, from this we learn that God makes no mistakes in how any human being is created. Which I feel like as a modern person reading that, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, like, okay, sure, fine. That is a massive, massive theological statement for Rashi, a medieval rabbi, to be making. God doesn't make any mistakes, which means whoever you are, no matter how you exist on this earth, there are no mistakes. There's nothing wrong with you. You aren't a mistake. There's nothing about you that needs to be fixed, because you are made exactly the way that you're made. And it's fine. That's a huge statement theologically to be making, especially, I feel like, as a medieval rabbi. We don't give the medievals enough credit. I mean, he also says some stuff like in his life that are kind of icky, but that is really amazing. Got to give the man credit. Sforno, similar but Italian, says, we learn from this, similar but different, that it is an undisputed fact that the human essence, the soul, operates without regard to the body, which is the physical container for the soul. Interesting thoughts, Sforno. Sforno says, okay, if humans were created in the divine image, but God is not a person, and most, all, I feel comfortable saying all of our, certainly our medieval rabbis, were very, very big on really reinforcing the fact that we are not, we do not anthropomorphize God. God is not a person. And we can talk about God's arm or God's hand or God's back or whatever in a metaphorical sense, but we don't think God literally has any of the body parts that we have. So if we're created in God's image, it can't really mean any of this stuff. And Sforno kind of is using that, weaving it together to make a really big statement, which is that it's the soul. And what happens on the outside, all the body stuff, that's just a physical container for your soul. And your soul is divine. I think this is a great foundational text that we can use to everything that anyone does in terms of Jewish law, ritual tradition, and who it applies to and how it applies and how open can we really be and how many opportunities can we really provide. And if the answer to those questions is as many as possible for everybody, then it comes down to this kind of text, because this text says that there is a divinity and also humanity that is common to all people. And everything we do has to be based on that fact. It all comes down to this. My favorite text, my first text I teach, my favorite one, probably of all the ones I'm gonna teach you, but gotta start somewhere, gotta start big. So thoughts about B'tzelem Elohim, in the divine image that all of humanity were created. Unmute yourselves. We're all too grown up to be called on like it's class. Cool. Hello, person. Okay. Now we move forward a little bit in the text. We are in Exodus. So everything's already been created. Adam and Eve and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, all the people, all our favorite folks when we're in, slavery times. We've got Moses, the quintessential Jewish leader, the first big Jewish leader. Moses says to God, please, God, he's being called on. He's being called by God. And he is a little nervous. And he says, please, God, I have never been a man of words, either in times past or now that you have spoken to me, your servant. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. And God said to him, who gives man speech? Who makes him mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the divine? Which, even if you don't look at any commentaries, I just think it's a very sassy comeback on God's part. You have Moses who's saying like, look, I have difficulty in forming words and difficulty in speaking words. I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue, just to translate the Hebrew. And I always have been. Notice how he says in times past or now. So this is who I've always been. And God's response is, like, you don't think I know who you are? You do not think you think I don't know what you can and cannot do, your abilities and your disabilities? I know who you are, God's saying, and I'm calling on you. I chose you to be my instrument of liberation for the Jewish people. I chose you to be an extension of myself on earth. Like you think I don't know who you are? Which is just, again, theologically. And this is the Torah. This isn't even a commentator. It's not like some person. I mean, you can make a debate about who wrote the Torah, et cetera, but this is the Torah saying this. And I brought in a commentator because I just really get a kick out of this one. And it's Rabbi Hananel, which I never bring in because not really what I'm into mostly. But a lot of the commentaries on this are about how they try and bring it meta. And Rabbi Hananel just gets really, really micro on that. He says, but I think it's interesting because he's not a recent guy. He's at least a couple hundred years. And he says the fact that Moses mentioned two facets of his handicap separately, and he gives these two phrases in Hebrew, is proof that he had difficulty enunciating the letters, and it gives those letters, all of which require one's teeth. So Zayin, Shin, Resh, Samech, Sadi, Side Sophie. Furthermore, he mentioned the word, click down here, Magavad Lashon, to indicate he also had difficulty with letters involving the tongue. Kuf, Tet, Lamed, Nun, Tav, and kind of like read those letters to yourself and kind of see like how they hit your mouth differently. And I'm not so interested personally on, when you say Shin and Zayin and Reish, actually if you pronounce Reish properly, it really doesn't involve your teeth at all. So maybe he's pronouncing it an accent. Okay. It's not so much the specifics of what he's getting into, but it's the fact that Rabbeinu Hananel, hundreds of years ago, recognized the fact that it's not just, these people can't speak right. It's that there's different kinds of speech. I don't know. I feel like Rachel Zuckman should talk about this, or maybe we need Liz Vincent to tell me about using the right terminology. But I need a speech language pathologist to tell me how to say this properly.
What is it that you're asking?
Well, it's like that there's different, I think when you read ancient texts, especially ancient legal texts, so not Torah just says slow of speech, slow of tongue. Okay, what does that mean? And then if you read ancient legal texts, they pretty much just say like, well, there's people who can speak, there's people who can sort of speak but sort of not speak, and there's people who can't speak. And Rabbeinu Hananel actually takes the time to say that there's different kinds of speech disabilities. Like you can have a problem with this, you can have a problem with that. And I feel like that's much closer to how we understand speech today. But Rachel, if you want to talk about that, a little bit about that, I'd be happy.
Absolutely.
To learn.
So there's speech and language, which are different things, right? So you can have somebody who may have difficulty with actually enunciating the sounds, but they're still making very solid words, and they have good structure. And then there are people who have difficulty understanding, but can express quite well. And then there are people who are nonverbal but communicate. And I have a lot of patients who are nonverbal who sometimes communicate better than the patients who are verbal.
Interesting. Okay, so maybe I'm going to hold on to you and your expertise in this, because later we're going to get a little bit nitty gritty into that stuff. Oh, you have to go leave at 7:30, but then I will ask you questions later, but I'll reference you later.
Okay, sounds good. And I can send back emails and responses.
Awesome. So basically what I want everyone to kind of get out of this before I open up to any of the general questions or comments is that God is saying, as we already know from B'tzelem Elohim text earlier, all people are made in God's image. All people are people, and all people are divine. And here in Exodus, a couple books later, we see God saying to someone who said, well, I can't talk the way everyone else talks. I can't speak the way they speak. I don't use language the way everyone else uses language. And God says, do you think I don't know? I tasked you with something important because I need you to do something important for me. And that says volumes about, again, in spite of a lot of stuff that our tradition has been said to have said, this I think says a lot about what our tradition fundamentally, the Jewish tradition fundamentally believes about the abilities of people and their value. Questions, comments on this text from anyone?
Yes.
Please.
So why do you think that the rabbis, the sages, made it so difficult for people who had disabilities if they were learned regarding these texts?
Ooh, so I'm going to show you some of those texts later. And I'll explain to you their reasoning, and you can disagree with their reasoning. But that's a great question. I should have like reversed how I taught this. I don't know. I feel bad now. Hold on to that because I'll show you, and not that long. This is a quick one for me. This is a quick one. But thank you, Lily. I like it. I'm giving you a lot of ammo now. Here we have Leviticus. So a little bit after Exodus, we are learning, don't be a hindrance or take advantage. This is a very, very famous phrase. Don't insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind. Okay, first that part. Don't insult the deaf. Which maybe like, okay, yeah, that's rude. You shouldn't insult anyone. If you insult a deaf person, if you yell at a deaf person, someone who truly cannot hear, and you're like, yeah, you suck, they can't hear you. And don't place a stumbling block before the blind. Well, that actually could hurt somebody. You could say, but oh, they wouldn't know it was you. Maybe they just think there's something in their path that tripped them, and you could get away. These are both kind of things like you could get away with it. But here, Judaism, Jewish tradition, God, Torah is saying, no, just because you could get away with something that's horrible, so you shouldn't be doing it. And in a way, saying at the same time, if you're not supposed to do horrible things to people that you could get away with, you shouldn't do horrible things to anybody ever. Don't do horrible things. But I'm more interested personally in the last couple words. So it's got this very pretty famous injunction: do not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind. But then there's like that kicker at the end. You shall fear your God, I am God. Now, when you see that phrasing, you shall fear God, I am God, Ani Adonai, big alarm bells should be going off in your head when you read Torah text, because not such a spoiler alert, Torah is full of rules. Lots and lots and lots of rules. Rules about what you eat, rules about what you do on days of the week, what you don't do on certain days of the week, things you can do in business, how you construct your house, how you take care of your oxen. Rules, 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 so many rules. But when you see ever, I am God, following any rule, you know that that's a way of the Torah, God, people, however you think about Torah, saying, hey, like circle, big circle, this is really important. This is really, really important. So you know that this rule, which is about, not being a hindrance to people, don't take advantage of it. Like, don't be a hindrance. Don't put a stumbling block before someone who's blind. They're going to hurt themselves. And don't take advantage of people. Like, you can't just insult deaf people and think like, oh, they'll never know. No, that's not how the world works. As a Jew, it doesn't matter. You don't insult the deaf. You don't place a stumbling block before the blind. And you know this is a really big one because God reminds you at the end of, hey, I care about this rule super, super much. And the Ramban comments, he has a very long commentary on this. They all have big, long commentaries on this. It's a very famous rule. But he says, in the plain meaning, Pshat, the Torah mentions a deaf person with regard to insulting, because even though they do not hear and will not become angry about the insult, still the Torah warns one not to curse him. So really Ramban along those lines, probably what I got this from when I was first learning it, that it's not about, oh, they could hear you and be insulted. Is that it shows disrespect to them as a human being. And because that's when you're insulting somebody, you're disrespecting them and they're going to feel bad. It's both of those. So even if they can't hear you, you're still disrespecting them. And that's important, to not disrespect people, even if they're not aware or not able to be aware that you are being disrespectful or hindering them in some way. So yes, Lily, just talk.
I think I also read that there was also this was also a metaphor, that it wasn't just the actually for a blind person, don't put a stumbling block in front of a blind person, that it had to do with other, at a more sophisticated level, like maybe if someone's not as smart as you and you trick them or You see what I'm saying, Rabbi?
Yeah, so yeah, the Ramban, his explanation of this is very long. And you see where he says, in the part that I copied, it says in the plain meaning, the pshat. So the plain meaning, like the surface meaning, what it still means, but what it means in terms of what the words actually say is you shouldn't insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind. And what the Ramban and many of other commentators are saying is that this is in a meta sense, this is that you shouldn't, the stumbling block before the blind is really the big one. It's like one of my teachers in school used that as an example. She's like, I am trying, she was always on diets. And she's like, and someone, and everyone knows, she's like, everyone knows I'm trying to lose weight and I'm trying to cut, not eat junk. And if someone says, hey, Mimi, you want some cake? She's like, I'm gonna eat the cake, but like, I don't want to eat the cake and I shouldn't eat the cake because it's not healthy for me. And I don't want to be taking in like those kinds of calories. But if you offer me cake, I'll eat the cake. She's like, that is, don't put it. And she'd say, no, Loti ten mikshel. And if you offered her anything, she'd yell at you. But she was a Gemara teacher, so it's kind of okay to be yelled at in the Torah verses. But she's saying, like, to speak to your point that, don't make my life harder. Don't make people's lives more difficult. So yes, in the big sense, like begadol, it's about don't make people's lives more difficult. And in the kind of surface level, it's about it's interesting how the Torah uses people's disability, like more obviously disabled people, as a commentary on all people.
Okay, thank you.
Which is really interesting. So yes, you're correct, and then some action.
When I look at this, it's very specific what you shall not do. You shall not insult. You shall not place a stumbling block. But as you were talking about it, I was thinking, and you can go on with lots and lots of other examples of what you shall not do to be a hindrance to someone. But in order to not insult the deaf, you need to recognize maybe someone is deaf, or maybe recognize someone is blind, or recognize that someone has this different, ability, or however we want to call that. So in there, that seems like there's an opportunity to empathize, or encouragement to empathize with people, or to look for what are these things that I might accidentally hurt somebody, and so I want to not do that. So it's not just I was hearing it kind of not just what you shouldn't do, but there's something that you can do as well. Does that make sense? I don't know if I explained that very well.
I think so. It's interesting how
it just, instead of it just being don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, there's a corollary to that, which is what should you do? Well, you need to recognize recognize how you cannot be a hindrance to someone. Because it may not be obvious to look at somebody. You may not see that they're deaf. You may not see that they're blind, but what can I do instead of what I shouldn't do?
Oh, now I see what you're saying, because it's easy to think like, oh, the way I can be accommodating is by not making people's lives harder. But it's like, you don't know how to make how to level the playing field if you don't know what people need to have a level playing field.
Right. And that's something active to do, like to recognize that, as opposed to just, well, I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do this. Well, what should I do?
What should you do? Yeah. Oh, interesting. I have to try to remember what the stuff I have coming up to see that. Oh, I'll find out when I keep looking. Okay, so this is from the Talmud. I know I always try and give you the original text because I believe in showing the original text, but in my fairness to myself, it's from the Yerushalmi, and it's really hard to find digital versions of the Yerushalmi, which is the Talmud, but the Palestinian Talmud, I can't find a good digital Yerushalmi anywhere, so sorry. But you're to just trust me that this is in there, and this is the translation. Now, this is about compassion and understanding for all. And a blind man came to the city of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, where the rabbi invited him to dinner, sat him in a position at the table even more honored than his own. That was a big deal, where you sat at the table. The people of the city said, this must be a great man, or Rabbi Eliezer would not have placed him above himself at the table. They awarded the blind man a considerable sum. They gave him some nice chunk of change. What do I owe this? The man asked them. They replied, because Rabbi Eliezer placed you above himself at the table. Then the man prayed for them actually, as follows: you have shown loving kindness to him who is seen but cannot see. May the one who sees you but cannot be seen receive your graciousness and show loving kindness to you. So to me, there's two levels to this, kind of like every text. There's the pshat, and then there's like the sod, the remez, the stuff underneath. On a surface level, and it's still good and true. There was a blind man who came. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov gave him the position of honor, really, at the head of the table, which really, it's his home, and he's the man, so he should be at the front of it. And he's like, I'm going to take a back seat to this man. We don't know anything about this man. We don't know if he's a learned scholar. We don't know if they know each other. They have a relationship. We don't know. And he gives him this good position. Everyone in the town goes, wow, he must be really important. So they give him a sum of money, and then he goes, oh, that's so wonderful. Thank you. And we go, oh, we should be nice to everybody because that's what we do as Jews. That's how they treated the guest, the visitor who was blind, and they treated him very, very well. But I think there's something more interesting to this story, and it's how the blind man characterizes himself and God in the prayer that he does at the end. He says, you have shown loving kindness to him who is seen but cannot see. That's himself. He can be seen, but he can't see anyone. May the one, that's God, who sees you but cannot be seen, receive your graciousness and show loving kindness to you. And I just love that he uses that phrasing to describe God, because certainly in the way that the people in Talmudic times believed in God and thought of God and conceptualized God, and even the way today many of us think about God is that God can see us, God watches, God can see, but you can never see God. It's just that one could say, oh, this man is lacking because he can't see. And the way he talks about it is like, yeah, okay, there's some things I can do. I can be seen. And there's some things I can't do. I can't actively see myself. And God, there's some things God can do. God can see. But some things God cannot do or does not do, which is be seen. And I like that he draws that comparison, that parallel. Like kind of an opposite, but a parallel. And I think that's a really, really cool thing of the Yerushalmi. Very underappreciated Yerushalmi. Thoughts on this very odd little bit of Talmud? Now we're going to get into more nitty-gritty. They're having a discussion in Brachot about prayer. Rabbi Eliezer, this is the regular Talmud, Bavli, Babylonian, Iraqi. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah said, one who recites Shema must make it audible to their own ears. So when you say, you have to say it at least loud enough that you yourself can hear it. Even if it's just Shema Yisrael, so you can hear it. Because the prayer itself states, and he just quotes the Shema, it says Shema Yisrael, Adonai Elohim, Adonai Echad. I bolded it, it's the first line bold. Like, hear Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. Okay, that's an opinion. Thank you, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah. Rabbi Meir says back to him, it says, which I command you this day upon your heart, if you think of the V'ahavta, Asher Anohi Mitzavecha Hayom Alevavecha. It's like right after the Shema. It's all considered Shema, actually, technically speaking. Rabbi Meir says, well, it says, which I command you this day upon your heart. And thus we learn the words follow the intention of the heart, not what comes out of the mouth or in the ears. So, wow, Rabbi Meir, way to tell Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah is like, oh yeah, well, when you say the Shema, and for it to count, you got to say it loud enough that you can hear it. Because it says, hear Israel, Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel. Rabbi Meir says that's not nearly important enough as what comes next, which is when God is saying, I'm commanding you these things, when God says, this is what's important to be a Jew, which I command you this day, and command it upon your heart. So Rabbi Meir says, whatever you say, whatever these words are, they follow your heart, not what comes out of your mouth or in your ears. Which is a really big statement to make, because our tradition really, for the most part, follows Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah. But there are dissenting opinions by guys like Rabbi Meir. We're touching on stuff Lily was asking earlier, and I'll probably give you some more specifics later. But can you see now, Lily, where it's coming in? The whole, yes. It says you gotta be able to speak.
Yes.
And at a certain level, even though these people like that are being argued with, they, for the most part, don't win out. But there are disagreeing opinions, which I think is important. Now, I'm going to show you part. It might be a little bit difficult to reconcile, but you have to kind of realize that equality under Jewish law is equality. And this is, I think the next part is being excluded. Okay. In the Talmud, in B'tzelem, there's a blind person who would learn with Mar Shmuel, what a name, who observed that he was sad, this blind person. And Mar Shmuel said to him, why are you sad? And he said, because I did not do Erev Tavshilin. Erev Tavshilin is a little bit of cool hocus pocus that helps you to do your cooking on Chag, when it's a holiday, to get ready for Shabbat. Because on a holiday you can cook, which is great, but you can't cook for days that are not Chag. So you do a little bit of hocusy pocusy, and you basically, so you can cook on, you know, the holiday, whether it's Shavuot or Pesach or Sukkot or whatever, you can do your cooking to eat on Shabbat if it's no longer a holiday. So very important if that is a thing that you do. And he's saying, I didn't do Erev Tavshilin, which means you're not going to have any cooked food for Shabbat. That's going to suck. And what this poor blind guy, oh my gosh. So what does Mar Shmuel do? Mar Shmuel says, rely on mine. It's a very magnanimous thing. He's like, you know what, don't worry. I did Erev Tavshilin, so I'll be able to eat cooked food on Shabbat that I cooked on when it was still Chag. And here you go. You can use mine. Oh, that's very kind of him. Then something happens that looks bad, but in my opinion, actually is not bad. The following year, so it's jump forward a year, same holiday, different year. He once again observed that he was sad. Mar Shmuel said to him, why are you sad? And the blind man said to him, because I didn't do Erev Tavshilin. Mar Shmuel said to him, you are negligent. You may not join my Erev Tavshilin, as I do not intend to include such negligent people as yourself in my Erev. That's from the Talmud B'tzelem. Now I realize you might look at that and go like, wow, like Mar Shmuel, way to be a jerk to this poor blind guy. But here's the thing. It's kind of first time it was an accident. Maybe it slipped your mind. You were busy. It happens. Mar Shmuel is like, oh, I'm going to think, oh yeah, sure, okay, you're included. But Mar Shmuel is not treating him any different. He's treating, he's saying like, when you're blind, Mar Shmuel is saying, you don't, I'm not going to treat you like a child wouldn't be held to the same standards as you hold an adult. You're like, oh, a child is a child. But he's saying like, no, a blind person is a full Jewish adult under Jewish law. They're not a lesser person. So I'll be compassionate, you know, like I would to anybody the first time around. And the second time around, like, you know better now. And there's no reason why you would not know that. You learn with me, you're a learned man. He said the story starts, we start by learning it. He learns with him. He's aware of the holidays. He knows the laws. And yeah, okay, he can't see the way other people can see. But Mar Shmuel is saying you are a full-fledged Jew in every way. And I'm not going to baby you because you're not a baby. You're not a child. I'll be compassionate to you. But I'm not going to treat you like not a full-fledged adult with a fully functioning mind. And I think that's actually really important. Thoughts about this? You can disagree with me. I allow it. Sometimes. Okay, this is where that is important. So you could see the actual. This is especially when Lily was talking about, you know, like halacha and the Jewish legal system. This is the most kind of like easy to understand way I've ever seen halacha laid out. Very proud of myself. Wish someone had done this for me when I was in school. But there's three, but really four different categories of people and rules. There are things you got to do, you're obligated in. Like obligated. So obligated. Here. When you're obligated to do something, you have to do it. And you can help other people do it. So for example, men in Judaism, and especially in classic thinking of, you know, Orthodox, quote unquote, men are obligated in doing almost all the stuff. And all the Jewish stuff you can think of, men are obligated to do. They have to do it. And it means they can help other people do it. So if, you know, if you are a man and you are leading services, you're leading prayers, and someone who's sitting out there, like in the seat says, "Amen" to your prayer, that person basically, it's as if they said the prayer themselves. So like if you're a man, you're leading Kiddush, pray Priyagafen, and you're sitting out there and you go, "Ooh, Amen." It's as if you said that prayer yourself. And as a man, you're obligated to do that. If you're Orthodox, you don't think of women as obligated. So if a woman says Kiddush, that's all well and good, that's cute. But you can't say Amen to her blessing because she's not obligated to do it. Then we have this other category of permitted. You can do it, like if you want to, that's fine, that's nice, but you can't help other people do it because you're not obligated. You can only help other people do stuff if you are obligated. So we're gonna have Purim coming up, right? Very fun. And in LA, I've been to these women's Megillah readings where women will read Megillah for other women, which is okay. Like as a woman, you can hear Megillah being read by another woman because you both have the same level of, being obligated under Orthodox laws. Men, if they're going to be in there, like that's fine, but they don't get to check off the box of it. "Oh, I heard Megillah tonight." Nope, doesn't count for you. You'd have to hear a man do it. If you're Orthodox, which we're not, but still, interesting to know. This all comes into play with all the other stuff we're talking about. Exempt. You would have to do it under other circumstances, but you're going to get a pass. And because you're getting a pass, can't help other people do it. So that's like saying, if you are a man, you would be obligated to, I'm trying to think of a good example here, say the prayers 3 times a day. But as kind of classical halakha would have it, if you can't speak, well, you're exempt now. You're exempt from the obligation of saying those prayers. And because you're exempt, you can't help other people do it. And then we have this category of forbidden. You're not allowed to do it, and you can't help other people do it either. Now, this is the thing about sort of Orthodox halakha, classic halakha. People who are in these categories, like you could do it, but you don't have to. Or you could have had to do it, but you're exempt now. A lot of people in these categories have been shunted into this category. So, for example, women would say, "Oh, women aren't obligated to in head covering, or women aren't obligated into tefillin, or women aren't obligated in wearing tzitzit or talit," and has morphed over really not that much time into women are forbidden from doing this. Fun. Same thing to people who are deaf or hard of hearing, or who are like neurodiverse or blind or whatever. A lot of stuff that might have been permitted or that they were exempt from, they got shunted in the category of you're not allowed. Not getting into why that is because it's a very complicated answer, but point is, a lot of folks who are not sort of neurotypical abled men, i.e. people who got to stay over in this category, got shunted over into this category by the folks in this category. Probably should have another class on conservative Judaism. Speaking of disabilities, that's what we're talking about today. Physical disability. Historically, physical disability, and you notice we really haven't talked about that so much, because historically, physical disability has never been equated with non-normative intellectual capacity. Never in our text has anyone ever said, "Oh, this person can't walk or can't use their arms." No one ever said, "Oh, they can't lead services, they can't read Torah, they can't lead prayers." No one ever thought, "Oh, that's," because that was always a thing. It's like, if you can't think or speak or see like us, able people, then you're exempt, which becomes forbidden. Physical disability was never equated with anything like that. So physical disability has never been exempted, has never exempted anyone from full responsibilities and thus full rights in Jewish life. Now, people with physical disabilities have often been barred from synagogue life because synagogues aren't physically capable of being accessible to their needs. And that's wrong. Halachically, it's never been an impediment. I guess one could make the argument that we should be halachically required to make sure all of our prayer spaces are accessible to all people. I would argue that's true. Deaf and hard of hearing. Historically, people who were, and this historically in the world and historically Jewishly, people who were deaf and hard of hearing were assumed to be intellectually disabled. And it wasn't really until about the mid-19th century that Jewish scholars and legal minds started to learn that non-Jews started these schools for the deaf, even in the shtetls, even in Europe. And Jews started to be exposed in the mid-19th century and started to see like, oh, wait, and it sounds ridiculous to say now, but it's true for, 150 years ago, mid-18th century, that they said like, oh, wait, so like deaf people really actually can learn to communicate the way we do, or are intellectually capable the way we are. And that kind of threw a wrench into how a lot of Jewish text and thought and legal thought specifically was, because they're like, oh, wait, we formed our whole opinion of deaf and hard of hearing people on, we didn't think they were capable. It turns out we just didn't know how to communicate with them. And that kind of changed a lot of stuff, but in the same way, didn't change a lot of stuff, at least in kind of Orthodox thinking, which is unfortunate, but conservatives have done a lot. And then we have kind of neurodivergent intellectual disability, non-normative intellectual capacity are historically exempt in Jewish ritual life, meaning that no one's going to say, oh, you didn't pray 3 times a day, for example, that you would never hold people with intellectual disabilities to that same standard. Period. This was a lot, especially in terms of breaking down the halachic system, which is not just in terms of the people who are able and people who are disabled, but in terms of that's how halacha works, period. Questions about any of this? I just threw a whole bunch at you, so. I want to give you specific examples of conservative halacha and kind of classic, looking at classic halacha. What do I call Orthodox halacha? So when it comes to deaf and hard of hearing, we have, this is a very modern guy, Rav Moshe Feinstein, 19th, 20th century, talking about people who are deaf. And even they recognize there's different levels of people who are deaf. There's hard of hearing, people who can communicate a little bit, there's people who can't communicate at all in a way that not like hearing people can understand, the people who can use, signs, et cetera, and really what the community comes down to is that even someone who is deaf, who's legally considered to be deaf, should strive to fulfill the mitzvot. It's not proper that they should exempt themselves and say, oh, I can't because I'm deaf. Like, you should still try, but they all come down, I kind of, even if you read through them, they're going to say like, if you're deaf, you're not obligated. And remember, we the whole thing about obligation is if you're not obligated, then you can't be a leader in it, and you're not going to be recognized as a full member of the community. See, like children or women and slaves back in the time when there were slaves. You're not really a full Jewish adult. Again, classic halacha. Blindness. There's an issue with the reading the Torah. One who is blind may not chant the Torah portion because people cannot fulfill their obligations by hearing the Torah chanted from memory. You're not supposed to memorize the Torah. I know a lot of people do, but technically they're not reading. They're not memorizing, they're reading. I don't know how true that is. Ask your name. It's if they're memorizing, they'll tell you absolutely. But you're not supposed to listen to people who have memorized the Torah or read the Torah. You're supposed to hear people reading Torah who have memorized the Torah. Thus, even if a blind person has memorized the portion, it is forbidden to hear them in synagogue, and the obligation to chant Torah is not fulfilled, for they have not heard the text, the Torah from the text. So please.
I think that's just terrible. I mean, there's more
Okay,
to
why?
it
Tell
about it.
me more.
Yeah, I just think that that's just terrible. I can't believe, is this, what does the conservative movement say about this? It's
I'm so
giving-
glad you should ask. Look at the other side. So I want to show you kind of like classic halakha. This is really halakha. This is the way Jewish. I'm going to go through conservative, then I'm going to do a spiel. Conservative.
My glasses on.
I know. So conservative halakha for deaf and hard of hearing folks. We assume that deaf and hard of hearing folks in the conservative movement have the same rights and thus responsibilities as Jews who can hear. So if you're a deaf or hard of hearing Jew and you're using sign language and you're leading in the leadership role, meaning like if you're leading prayers and you're signing the prayers, that's fine. That counts. If you're reading Torah, if you're a deaf Jew and you're signing Torah, that counts as reading Torah. So says the conservative movement.
Okay.
And when it comes to blindness, so we know, and as conservative Jews, we don't just say, "Oh, this doesn't work. Let's throw it away." Like we say, like no, we're conserving the tradition. So we understand the same halakha that our friends who follow classic halakha, who are Orthodox, we understand the same halakha that they do. And the whole like the Torah has to be read from a scroll thing, and has to be read, not memorized, from a scroll, not a book. Okay, so there's a couple different options out there in the conservative movement. One is you can say the prayers for being up there, and you could chant like someone who could be reading actually from the Torah, and you could be chanting it from memory. Okay, that's one option. Second is that like you could be translating verse by verse, and third is you could actually just read from a Braille section. The debate is, here's the debate. Some would say you can only read from a Braille section of Torah if it's already been read from the scroll. Remember, because we don't let you read from a book, because Torah has to be read from a scroll. But there's a debate right now, and it's not as much of a debate because there aren't as many blind Jews out there. And the more of something that there are, the more the rabbis are going to talk about it. Like right now, they're just talking about pretty much intermarriage. Blind Jews, not a huge number. The debate is, what if you had a scroll that was Braille? And there's a Braille Torah, and it's a scroll, and it's there, like all the words are there, they're in Braille. And you could say, well, but no one can understand Braille. Like, well, the blind can understand Braille, and to be fair, most people don't understand Hebrew, and they still manage to stand up there and read Torahs, and we don't make questions about that. So what if there was a Braille scroll, and people read from that? And some synagogues just have that, and they allow it, and some don't.
Is it really a Braille Torah?
I believe there is one, last I heard. And there's an Orthodox bat mitzvah, but again, they don't think girls are obligated, so they don't really care how you do whatever you do. But as far as I'm aware, I believe there's one Braille Torah. You'd have to like find it, hunt it down. So that just, I want to show you kind of like a sort of side-by-side comparison. The blindness thing is an issue for Torah reading for sure, because the whole scroll thing. No one has an issue with you leading prayers. In terms of blindness, they do have an issue if you're deaf or hard of hearing. If you're not conservative, it's fine. However you communicate is how you communicate. And the classic halachic reading on it is kind of, well, you can see what it is. And just to kind of wrap it up before opening to questions and stuff, I realize there's a lot of halakha. A lot of this came down to halakha. And you could say like, oh, well, Sarah, I'm not so interested in halakha. I want to know. But here's the thing. No matter how little you personally care about halakha, about Jewish ritual, how, especially ancient and medieval and all the Jews before us, how they conceived of Jewish ritual life and people's place within Jewish ritual life, whether that's men, women, able, disabled, neurotypical, neurodiverse. That is going to affect how Jews in general approach Jewish ritual life. Even if you're like, I don't care what happens in the synagogue, I don't care if you're halakha, if you're obligated or not, who cares? sure, yeah. And, you know, women's place in Judaism and children's place in Judaism and converts' place in Judaism and disabled people's place in Judaism and neurodiverse people's place in Judaism is all affected by how Jewish culture that's formed around what you can and can't do and how much of a Jew you're allowed to be. And that's why I think it's so important to kind of to show you the halacha, not because I'm just like, yay, I mean, I am the halacha, I love teaching and learning halacha, but also because it forms such a bedrock of how we approach people's place in synagogue life and in ritual life. And I didn't even get into kind of like neurodiversity and in the synagogue, because I could talk about how, you know, different synagogues, like if you're somebody who, if you're a person with autism, what does your bar mitzvah look like? If you're a person with like extreme social sensitivity, what does your bat mitzvah look like, et cetera, and how synagogues deal with that is always different. And the conservative movement of God is like kind of leaps and bounds, especially in Israel. There are Orthodox who will take their kids to conservative shuls to have b'nai mitzvah because they can't do it at Orthodox synagogues. And the Orthodox synagogue says, and you've seen the text already, that they say like, well, if you're not like us, you're exempt, which means you are now forbidden and there's no place for you. And the conservative movement, the sorting movement in Israel says, there's a place, come to us, there's a place, we'll make a place. And they actually do huge things there. Gets them bullied a lot by the Orthodox in that area, but they're doing the Lord's work as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, Judaism has I think it's important to, you know, to not whitewash it and say everything's been peachy keen, like we're so great. Like, look, there's some difficult stuff in our history, in our text. I would say not even so much in our Torah text, but in like the people who came. The problem's always people, isn't it? The people who came after. But there's also a really great Torah basis that's important that says that all people are people and all people are equally divine. And you have to respect the divinity in them. And I think as long as we're taking steps in that direction, we can kind of course correct the ways we've gone off base. And it's going to be a struggle, and it's never soon enough for the people who are actually affected by it, but I think we have to try. So I'm done with 3 minutes to spare. Jennifer, how proud are you of me? Very proud. I know. Thank you. And I'm happy to take questions. You can leave, whatever you want.
Yishal koach. Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Rukti.
Thank you, Rabbi. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Lily.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Oh, thanks, Mom. You're so funny. Stop share. Boom, done. Okay. I don't think I've ever finished on time before. That's so exciting for myself.